If you cross the Solent Strait off the southern coast of England today, you are met by steep chalk cliffs and quiet coastal towns. But in the late 7th century, this narrow stretch of water was the final physical barrier protecting a localized society from total, calculated erasure. Behind those cliffs sat the Isle of Wight, a 150-square-mile landmass occupied by the Wihtwara. They were a distinct Jutish kingdom, culturally and politically isolated from the sprawling Anglo-Saxon domains, rapidly expanding across the British mainland. In early medieval Britain, warfare followed a predictable economic model. Kings invaded neighboring territories to extract tribute, secure hostages, and install puppet rulers. The goal was to establish hegemony, not to alter the demographics of the conquered land. We see this exact model applied to the Isle of Wight in 661 AD. King Wulfhere of Mercia successfully invaded the island, established his dominance, and transferred its overlordship to a neighboring king. The Jutish leadership remained in place, and the civilian population was left entirely intact to produce the required wealth. 25 years later, King Cædwalla of Wessex landed on the same beaches. His campaign abandoned the established rules of tributary warfare entirely. This is a manuscript page from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The entry for the year 686 documents the arrival of Cædwalla and his brother Mull on the island. It is a strictly chronological, dry military record of the invasion force. But the ecclesiastical historian Bede provides the exact operational objective of that force. He records that Cædwalla arrived intending to slaughter the native inhabitants without mercy, and to repopulate the island entirely with his own West Saxons. For centuries, historical accounts have dressed this event in religious hagiography. When we strip that framing away, what remains is a mechanical, logistical, and political blueprint for demographic replacement. To understand how this operation was executed, we have to look at the physical terrain. This map highlights the Solent, the strait separating the island from the mainland. It is only 2 to 5 miles wide, but its erratic tidal flow makes it a formidable natural barrier. Historically, this aquatic barrier insulated the Wihtwara. It allowed them to maintain a Jutish material culture and a distinct identity, completely walled off from the West Saxon populations sitting just a few miles north. Inside the island, the topography is dominated by stark chalk downland ridges. These natural walls limit where civilians can move, where they can build settlements, and where they can effectively cultivate food. And on the western perimeter, the terrain simply shears off. Looking at these sheer physical drop-offs, the problem becomes obvious. There is absolutely zero traversable coastline to facilitate a mass civilian evacuation. A moat functions as a defensive perimeter exclusively on the condition that you maintain naval parity. Once the enemy commands the water, the geography undergoes a tactical inversion. The moment the West Saxons achieved naval supremacy in the Solent, the water stopped keeping invaders out and started keeping the native population in. The island immediately transitioned from a fortress into a sealed cage. Without a vast terrestrial hinterland to retreat into, the Wihtwara could not fall back, disperse, and regroup. The geography dictated the military outcome. A defeated population here could only be eradicated. The West Saxon amphibious assault across the Solent required immense logistical coordination. Transporting enough troops to lock down a 150-square-mile territory required hundreds of landings, rapidly moving men and supplies onto the beaches before the Wihtwara could mount a unified defense. The campaign utilized asymmetric, systemic violence directed squarely at civilian population centers, bypassing the need for a single grand-pitched battle between two standing armies. To permanently clear the land, Cædwalla's forces targeted agricultural infrastructure. By deliberately burning settlements and destroying crop stores, the West Saxons methodically eliminated the island's capacity to keep the native population alive. Surviving civilians were physically displaced outward. The military corralled the Jutish population away from the fertile agricultural centers of the island, pushing them toward the hostile, unlivable coastlines. It was during this initial violent phase of coastal displacement that the final Jutish king Arwald was killed on the battlefield. Cædwalla chose this absolute destruction over subjugation for a simple economic reason. The Wihtwara did not possess deep reserves of portable wealth or highly valuable raw materials. They had nothing to offer in tribute that was more valuable than the land they occupied. The operational phase functioned as a deliberate agricultural and demographic reset, reducing the island to a blank slate for West Saxon resettlement. With the macro-level demographic replacement underway, Cædwalla faced an acute micro-level political crisis. King Arwald was dead, but his two juvenile brothers had survived the initial sweep. The two boys managed to flee across the Solent to the British mainland, but lacking a safe haven, they were quickly betrayed by local informants and captured by Cædwalla's forces. While Cædwalla recovered from wounds sustained during the invasion, the two boys remained in a grim, bureaucratic holding pattern. They were now subjects of a formal execution order. We know about their final moments entirely through the ecclesiastical history compiled by Bede. The text documents that a local abbot from a nearby monastery intervened, requesting permission from Cædwalla to baptize the boys before their execution. Bede's specific framing of this moment is critical. He writes that after receiving the sacrament, the boys went joyfully to their temporal deaths, secure in their heavenly reward. But treating this purely as a narrative of spiritual salvation obscures its geopolitical function. Forced baptism in this context operated as a mechanism of political pacification. It culturally assimilated the boys into the victor's religion mere moments before their lives were ended. From a pragmatic military standpoint, the execution was an absolute necessity. Allowing male heirs of the Jutish royal line to mature in exile provides a permanent rallying point for future rebellions. This leaves the military annexation perpetually compromised. This quiet, formalized execution was the definitive fatal blow. By surgically severing the royal bloodline in a timber room on the mainland, Cædwalla guaranteed the permanent dynastic extinction of the Wihtwara state. With the population displaced and the leadership executed, the physical territory of the island was immediately redistributed. The land was carved up among West Saxon elites, granting 1/4 of the acreage directly to the church. The political independence of the island was structurally dismantled, absorbed entirely into the West Saxon administrative apparatus, and governed directly by the Bishop of Winchester. There is a final, bitter historical irony attached to this annexation. Decades later, the two executed juvenile brothers were collectively venerated by the church under the title Saint Arwald. This canonization was a highly calculated move. Elevating the murdered heirs to sainthood served as a deliberate propaganda strategy by later chroniclers, designed to appease any lingering local sympathies among the surviving descendants on the mainland. By legally executing children, the state secured its borders. By reframing that execution as a voluntary spiritual martyrdom, the church sanitized the historical record, ensuring the violence was remembered as a triumph of faith rather than a political purge. The campaign of 686 AD leaves a terrifyingly efficient record. It demonstrates exactly how geographic isolation, when met with absolute military pragmatism, can be leveraged to permanently extinguish a people and erase their political identity from the